Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar entitled Why Two-Factor Authentication Isn't Enough. I'd like to warmly welcome you on behalf of Auth and Core Security. My name is Rob Pakai. I'm the Sales Director for the local region here, and we are also joined by J.R. Miller, who is the Solution Consultant for the region. Today, our content and discussions that we'll be going through is very much based on some of the industry knowledge that we have. We do talk to our customers on a regular basis and understand their perspective of some of the issues that are occurring. And particularly, we have analysts that are going through and discussing some of the various issues that we talk about today. So I hope you get a good understanding and a couple of great ideas out of the presentation that we'll talk through. Of course, first thing we do before we kick off, we do have some housekeeping just to cover off. So the lines have been muted. If you have any questions, you can submit those at any time using the Q&A panel. You should be able to see that on your WebEx conference. We will cover off the questions at the end. So the webinar will run for about 30 minutes and then we have some time to cover off the questions. Of course, we will be recording this particular presentation and slides will be available later this week. And importantly, we do have a prize giveaway at the end of this webinar, so I would encourage everyone to interact and submit questions. We will definitely be using that as some credit points to give away those prizes. If you have any questions, please note down also the email address there, which is webinars@secureauth.com. And we'll be happy to come back to you with any clarifications or even chat to you in direct via the phone or in person. So with that, we'll kick off the webinar. Of course, the first thing we need to do is level set a little bit, just to have a look at the background. So we all understand passwords are out there. They have been out there for many decades now. It's nothing that's new. If we look at some of the studies that have occurred recently, one of them is around Wakefield. And Wakefield actually did an interesting study on IT decision makers and also the level of multi-factor authentication that's in place at organizations. And one of the things that they found is that just over half of the assets that an organization has is protected by multi-factor authentication. The interesting thing is that almost 44% of those assets aren't protected. So, which actually begs the question, why is it? Interestingly, Telstra also in their latest cybersecurity survey did a survey which actually talks about cloud apps and multi-factor authentication, and roughly 71% of the cloud apps aren't protected by any means. So it is an interesting thing that we find as to why this is the case. For some of the people on the line in terms of the security folks and so forth, you may have seen the data breach report by Verizon, and 4 out of 5 breaches have used compromised credentials. So we know that the password is actually an issue, and password is actually becoming very much the weakest link. So attackers will use this to find the weakest link, get into the system and move laterally. And of course, part of that, in terms of usability and security, we're trying to increase the amount of password changes and increase the complexity of passwords to try to get around this. But we all understand that even NIST has agreed that actually increasing password complexity is causing a poor security practice because it is a usability issue. So people typically reuse their passwords across different applications, and it does present a very poor experience. So really, you know, single-factor passwords, we all understand, are not the way forward. And it really comes to our first survey of the webinar. So on your screen, you should be able to see a polling question. You have a couple of multiple choice questions there, but really we're asking what percentage of your assets or resources are protected with two-factor authentication today. All right, thank you for placing your responses through there. The answers are anonymous, so we will only see the accumulated results as well out of this. So we talked about the first part there, which is around the password. And one of the challenges really is usability. So what we've generated as an industry is the ability to do things like single sign-on, which of course reduces the number of logons and increases usability. But however, part of this is that we are actually introducing a security risk, because if that one particular logon is not protected, then effectively once someone gets access to that, they have single sign-on to every other application. The interesting thing is that 99% of IT decision makers feel that two-factor authentication is the best way to protect. But yet, only just over half of those assets are protected with two-factor authentication. So it begs the question, why is it the case? And on the right-hand side, you can see that from the Wakefield study that there are reasons why people are not deploying two-factor authentication. And in fact, this actually clarifies with the organisations that we work with locally here in ANZ as well. The top two are very relevant. The first one is resistance from executives in the company. They just don't want another factor or another click or login to interrupt them. And the other reason is a lot of security folks are not putting this out there because they are worried about actually disrupting how users access various applications and resources, and they worry that they're going to have the same problem with such as the passwords, where people stop using it and look for other ways around. Of course, another part of it is that there are many anonymity networks out there, such as Tor, which try to hide the intent of access. So the issue around that is that these access points are trying to get into systems, and a lot of the cases they are malicious and very difficult to keep track of. So it comes to the next survey of the webinar, which is around whether you feel two-factor authentication is actually the best way to protect assets and resources. Excellent. Thank you very much for placing those responses. So one thing the industry did is they did put two-factor authentication in place, right? What we are finding though, it's very easy to Google and look up some of these flaws, but basically two-factor methods are becoming very similar to the password, which is they are another factor, they are slightly more secure, but they are being broken by the attackers. And we know about some of these flaws, such as SMS, which has been basically hacked, and typically it can be a combination of whether it's a technical flaw within the two-factor method or whether it's just social engineering, such as diverting or SIM porting people's numbers so you can actually get access to their one-time passwords. It's actually a quite common use case, and if you look at some of the recent news articles, this is happening today. Here's a quick video here. I'm not going to show this, but if you have a phone handy or your camera ready, you can take a photo of that QR code and be able to go off and look at this. It's quite an entertaining video to look at, where it's not even a technical flaw or technical risk that we're looking at, but it's basic social engineering. It's a person calling up into a provider, and basically by using some clever techniques in terms of social engineering, they're able to get access to someone's account. So please have a look at this when we finish this webinar, and take a note of that link if you have the opportunity now. So on the other aspect of that, we talked a little bit about security and usability challenges. But equally, in terms of looking at your business value, it's actually quite easy to calculate the business value that happens in terms of being able to put in two-factor and password savings. So if we look at the password calculator, for example, you basically have the ability to look at how many password resets that you do per year, putting together the number around the per call cost for that, and you can very quickly put together an ROI business case about how much password resets alone can be saved by providing people with self-service functions. Equally with SSO, you can do similar things around productivity savings. So there are abilities to calculate business value on top of the security aspects and usability aspects of presenting this sort of solution to the business. And one thing I just want to cover off is that there are areas where, in terms of the organisations that we work with, they look at both from a security perspective, so de-risking the organisation from some of the flaws that are inherent in just passwords and two-factor alone, but also looking at from a usability perspective, so providing the best experience to end users and effectively having two-factor as an exception rather than the rule. And certainly putting a business case together is an important part of that. And typically what we find is self-service and password resets tend to be the best business case to put together because it's a very clear and it's a very quick saving for the organisation. So I want to talk about that there is a better way, and I've got JR joining to talk about that better way, and SecureAuth can provide a solution that helps with some of the challenges that we talked through. So I'm going to just pass over to JR. Thank you, JR.
Thanks for that, Rob. So how can we provide strong security and better user experience? SecureAuth is uniquely positioned today to provide a level of security to ensure that only legitimate users who should have access to assets of your organization have access, and at the same time have easy access, seamless access. Rob mentioned several different challenges that organizations are faced with, two factors, and we're going to do a little bit deeper of a dive into how that works. So let's go through a couple of things, a couple of aspects of SecureAuth from a security perspective. When you look on the left side, users in your organization might be employees, they might be partners of the organization, they might be end users or your customers themselves. As we work through this flow, we're going to look at how SecureAuth ensures a higher degree of security than your standard two-factor authentication. So firstly, SecureAuth is providing adaptive authentication, which provides a context of risk that a user potentially could present when they are authenticating into your systems. We're going to do a little bit deeper dive on what that looks like specifically as we work through the systems. The second piece that SecureAuth is providing is a higher level of flexibility and options for two-factor authentication. So SecureAuth is providing over 25 methods of two-factor authentication, ensuring that you have the ability to offer methods for your users that they can use that also meet your business risk aversion requirements. Finally, SecureAuth is unique in that we can provide continuous authentication. That is, we can provide post-authentication assessment. When a user is in your system and potentially get up from their machine, go grab a cup of coffee, a glass of water, if a bad actor steps in, we can actually assess that difference in user behavior to determine that this is a new user and potentially handle that session, that user session, accordingly. SecureAuth is also, in that same vein, we are offering flexible workflows. So not all users are the same. You've got users that potentially are higher risk users because they have more privileges to your systems or your resources, and you have users who are low risk users. So we can actually adapt the workflows within the authentication based on those types of users. And finally, we can feed all of this information back to your internal SIM or your SOC to provide real-time data around authentication. So we can actually give you some visibility in your security operations center to potentially malicious actors inside of your network. Now, I talked about going into the pre-authentication risk analysis that SecureAuth provides. So we're going to walk through a couple of the layers of adaptive authentication, do a quick overview. So with adaptive authentication, SecureAuth is providing a context of where a user is coming in from and how that user is coming in. So we do that using the various layers that are described here. I'm going to talk through a couple of them, but give you a chance to just take a quick look at the screen. And firstly, we're going to look at the device that a user is coming in from. So is this device something, or a device, whether it's a mobile, a PC, notebook, that the user is authenticated from before? We're going to feed that in as part of the risk assessment to see if it's a trusted authentication. As we work through to threat service, we can evaluate, is this user coming in from a known IP of a bad actor? Is this part of an APT or a command and control IP? And if so, how do we handle that user? When we look down at the geolocation, geovelocity, and geofencing, we're not only looking at potentially whitelisted or blacklisted IP addresses from countries we trust or areas that we don't trust, we're also looking at travel. So improbable travel events, meaning if I log in from Sydney and 5 minutes later I log in from Perth, that's an impossible travel event. That's going to raise flags and prevent that user from authenticating. With SecureAuth's phone number fraud prevention, we can actually evaluate the carrier that a user is coming in with, and potentially you may want to restrict certain carriers from authenticating. So not only can you whitelist or blacklist specific geographies, you can actually whitelist or blacklist specific carriers from using OTP. At the same time, we can actually prevent denial of service with OTP as well. When we look at behavioral biometrics, as I mentioned before, we can assess how a user is actually interacting with their device and build a profile of that user based on how they interact with their device to ensure that this is actually still the same user. So in short, SecureAuth is providing a higher level of security by assessing risk and presenting that two-factor method for users only when that level of risk is met or exceeded. So if you think of it like you would think of a key is effectively a username, password, and potentially an OTP or a second-factor method where anyone can use that key to authenticate. The lock does not know if the holder of that key actually should have access to those assets. SecureAuth is providing more of an access point like a doorman would provide. A doorman recognizes you. It recognizes your device. It recognizes your IP address and your behavior. It makes it easy for end users to connect in without unnecessarily stepping that user up to provide two-factor authentication. And finally, SecureAuth is adjusting over time. So much like a doorman would see a user potentially changing their look. I know last month I was participating in Movember. A doorman saw that my mustache was growing in thicker, so after that was removed, that doorman may not have recognized me and maybe stopped me to take a look. And that's exactly what SecureAuth can do. When there's a level of risk presented that's unusual, it stops the user, and if there is no risk presented, it allows that user to pass through seamlessly. So when we look at user experience, SecureAuth is offering a high degree of security, but SecureAuth is not presenting a level of friction with what you might see with standard two-factor authentication. We're only prompting the user for two factors if risk is found. Once the user is authenticated, we offer the ability for them to access multiple apps, business apps in their day-to-day without having to authenticate again and potentially having to two-factor in again. And we're also enabling those end users to self-serve, so manage their account information, their account details, manage their preferred devices, preferred two-factor methods potentially, and giving them the ability to reset passwords, unlock accounts, even enroll into new applications. So quick look visually of what adaptive authentication looks like for a day-to-day experience. And in this example, I'm going to use one user who is typically authenticating on a normal day from a device inside of a corporate network. When you look on the left column, those are all of the adaptive layers that are assessing that particular user's authentication state. On any given day, they're coming in from a device that's recognized, from an IP that poses no risk, and they're not performing any sort of geography rule. They're not going outside of the geography that they normally would be authenticating from. So in the office, they authenticate. If you look at the bottom of the normal day column, we are going to pass them through the workflow that's chosen for that user, just to simply allow them through without any sort of two-factor step-up. Now that same user, in the next column over on a travel day, there are a couple of additional risks that are potentially flagged. That user is now logging in from a new location and outside of the geography that's been allowed in their standard authentication states. Now, in this case, we're still going to allow them to, after they validate that they are who they say they are, using a two-factor method. Now, in the next column over, the lost laptop or the lost/new laptop, in this case, that person's still potentially traveling, and maybe they lost their laptop. They had to pick up a new laptop, they're traveling outside of the country, and they've still got to do business. So you're going to see a few other risk flags. In this case, we're going to prompt that user for two-factor. They're coming in from a new device, they're coming in from a different location, and we are going to prompt that user for a two-factor method to validate that they are who they say they are. As we work over to stolen credentials and stolen laptop, this is potentially a bad actor who took the laptop. They potentially have that legitimate person's credentials and that legitimate person's laptop. But you can see that that particular user is not going to pass the two-factor test. They are posing more risk as they're authenticating in as a valid user, and we can potentially either deny them outright or redirect that bad actor to a honeypot and gather more details about that bad actor. So finally, I want to show what SecureAuth is calling the new adaptive. If you look at the two-factor authentication column, this is typical two-factor authentication implementation. This is why IT decision makers are having challenges with deployments. It is better, it's more secure than a password alone, but it is very hard on user experience. When you look at old adaptive, we're adding some additional variables for easier end-user experience. When you look at SecureAuth's new adaptive, we're actually deploying a lot of additional capabilities. We're offering flexibility, we're offering self-service capabilities for end users, we're offering additional capabilities for even internal IT help desk. We provide contextual risk assessment to determine if an end user even needs to present or be presented with two-factor authentication. And we're able to front-end all applications. So whether it's VPN, whether it's a cloud application or an on-premise application, we can front-end and utilize a single sign-on for all applications within an organization. Post-authentication monitoring is something we're doing actively as a user is beyond the authentication state using behavioral biometrics. Finally, I just want to point out, you guys can read these out, but one thing that really has stood out with me with working with customers is the speed in which we deploy. SecureAuth is a single solution, so it's providing all of this value to organizations and doing that very quickly. So the solution deploys typically in days. We're not looking at weeks or months to deploy into an organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Rob.
Thank you, JR. So you might be asking at this point, where can I learn more about what SecureAuth does? So on our website, there are a couple of links there that we've listed for you. Of course, contact us. So webinars@secureauth.com is is definitely a contact point, and we're happy to, Garrett and myself, to talk to you over the phone or in person. We are based out of Melbourne, just for reference, but we do visit Sydney and other parts of Australia very often. So one thing just to leave as a summary is that, in looking at these types of deployments and so forth, the two things that always come up, and certainly from our experience, is one is you'd like to increase security, but at the same time, you want to ensure that usability is great. Because we all know without great usability, people just go around it or just stop using it. So what SecureAuth provides you, and another way to think about it is that we evaluate trust. We look at someone, we evaluate the level of trust. So the better we understand an authentication or an identity, the better we're able to evaluate whether it's a known threat or whether it's just part of a low risk. And that actually improves security and usability at the same time. And that's something to think about as you deploy out. If you're looking at deploying currently in terms of a project, those are two key criteria. We feel very strongly that without being able to present usability to your organisation, projects are very, very easy to fail. So let's have a look through the questions that we have here. So one of the questions is that is asking, I believe it's asking around, my organisation uses hard tokens for two-factor authentication today. Can SecureAuth be used without causing massive learning curve and disruption to our day-to-day operations? If so, how? So absolutely, hard tokens is something that we do see very often. Organisations tend to either have that mass deployed to start with, or they will very much wean off those hard tokens, because one of the things that we do find is it is quite disruptive, and if people lose tokens, for example, then they can't get access to their systems. So it can be a bit of a burden on end users. SecureAuth does support many of the hard token types, such as RSA, and it's quite a common scenario where we can either work hand in hand at the same time with those systems whilst we migrate away from it. And that's exactly the same as what you saw in this webinar today. It is the same process in terms of security and also end user convenience. We do have another question around, I think it refers to Office 365. So the question is around, does it work for O365? The answer is yes. We do have a white paper that we can reach out to you if you'd like to see further information. The other option is we do have it off our website. So if you visit the secureauth.com website and search for the Office 365 white paper, it's actually on the website that talks about how we integrate into Office and some of the security and usability aspects that we provide. We have one more question here which relates to remote access or VPNs. I think the question is related to the integration to it. So we do have many types of integrations. We are a standards-based organisation, so if it's based on a standard or if we have it as part of the vendor list, which we support quite a few, then we have that available, and it includes all the major vendors, the VPN vendors like Citrix and Cisco and Juniper and so forth. So we can provide you some more information on that. So of course, it's come to our prize giveaway section now. So we will direct message the person that will win the prize. So look out for your chat window right now, because we will be sending you a message in the next 30 seconds. So just bear with us while we do that. Okay, we've just sent the message. So if you've received a message in your chat window, could you please reply to us to confirm that you've received that? And we'll get your details so we can send you the 2 Gold Pass tickets, and congratulations. So that concludes our webinar. For the person that was direct message, could you please hold the line while we get your details? But if there are any questions, again, webinars@secureauth.com is the best email to direct those questions to. Otherwise, please enjoy the rest of your day, and I thank everyone for attending the webinar today.